ouvimos agora a palestra do professor Mitchel, né? É o criador do Scratch, o programa que vocês têm já nas máquinas, né, da Secretaria Municipal e que muitos têm trabalhado, né? E é um pesquisador que veio lá do MIT para conversar com vocês hoje. Muito obrigada, professor.
It's wonderful to be here with you today. I've had a wonderful visit in Brazil for the last few days at the Scratch conference at USP, and it's a great opportunity to get a chance to talk with all of you today. I really want to thank the Lemon Foundation for all that they've done, for helping to make these connections. It's great to get a chance to meet the Secretary and to the others who are involved with the programs here in São Paulo. It was also great to hear those 4 presentations. I was really impressed with the work that was described by the 4 teachers. So first, I just want to give another round of applause to those 4 teachers. I was especially impressed at how they were making connections between the Scratch programming and issues in their community, such as the issues of trash in the community and issues of the Zika virus. Because I think that really captures the spirit of what we want with Scratch and coding, that it's not just a separate activity, but something that integrates into the life of the school and the life of the community. I want to share a story with you from almost 20 years ago, in the year 1999, when we were just about ready to enter the new century and the new millennium. And at the time, there were a lot of discussions about some of the most important moments from the last 1,000 years, and about predictions and hopes for the next 1,000 years. And I was at one conference on a panel where they asked us the following question. They asked, what was the most important invention of the last 1,000 years? Now that's a very long time, and of course there were many important inventions between the year 1000 and 2000. And people on the panel had many ideas. Some people talked about the printing press. And of course, that was a very important invention that allowed people to spread ideas and knowledge to greater distances and preserve ideas over time. Other people mentioned the steam engine that marked the beginning of the industrial age, and it had a huge impact on the economy and the lives of people around the world. Other people mentioned the invention of the computer. They came near the end of the 1,000 years, but maybe will have the biggest impact in the next 1,000 years, and highlighted the growing importance of information, that the success in the world today is not just based on the raw materials that we bring from the earth, but the way we share information, and the computer can play a role in that. Now, clearly, those were all very important inventions. But as I thought about it, I had a different answer for what was the most important invention of the last 1,000 years. And my answer was kindergarten. Now, that might surprise some people, but most people don't even consider kindergarten an invention. But in fact, it was an invention, and I think a very important invention. As you might know, kindergarten was invented about 200 years ago in the early 1800s in Germany. And it was not just a school for younger children. It was a whole different approach for learning and education. Before Froebel started the first kindergarten in Germany, most schools were organized as a type of broadcast approach where the teacher would stand in front of the class and deliver information to the students who would write it down and then recite it back to the teacher. And Froebel knew that that was not a very good approach for 5-year-olds, as he wanted to create a school for 5-year-olds. So he thought about an entirely new approach for education and learning, where children were more actively engaged in experimenting and exploring the world around them. And Froebel developed some new toys for his kindergarten. They were called Froebel's gifts. They were blocks and beads and other materials that children could use to design things, to make models of what they saw in the world. If you go into many kindergartens today, you see current day versions of many of these same objects, of wooden blocks and finger paints and crayons. And as children create with finger paints and crayons and blocks, they learn a great deal. When they build a tower out of blocks, they learn about structure and stability. But I think most important, they learn about the creative process. In kindergarten, children start to learn how to take an idea and create something based on their idea, and then to start experimenting with the project they've created, and to share it with other people, and to get feedback from other people, and then to get new ideas and keep making changes. And I think that's at the core of the creative process that is so important today. And although kindergarten was invented 200 years ago, I feel that kindergarten provides exactly the model we need for today's society. Because if there's one thing we know about today's society, it's that things are changing more rapidly than ever before. So what's most important for today's children growing up in a fast-changing society is they need to learn how to think and act creatively, because we know they'll be confronted with a never-ending stream of new and uncertain situations. So we can't just teach children a fixed set of facts. We need to help them learn how to think creatively, to come up with innovative new ideas. And that's what happens when you start in kindergarten. Now, unfortunately, in many schools, in many parts of the world, education changes after this. And too often, education moves back to the delivery of information, where a teacher is delivering information or delivering instruction. And even when new technology comes into the classroom, oftentimes it's used in this same model. The computer is used to deliver information and deliver instruction. And of course, that can be useful sometimes, but I don't think that's the way we're going to help young people grow up as creative thinkers. That is so important in today's society. So we want to move away from this model of education to more of a kindergarten model. But in some ways, it's a big challenge. In fact, if you visit many kindergartens today, at least I know it's this way in the United States. I don't know if it's this way in Brazil. But in many places, kindergartens today are becoming more like the rest of school, where children in kindergarten, rather than playfully creating things in collaboration with others, are filling out phonics worksheets and studying at math flashcards. So kindergarten is becoming more like the rest of school. And what I want to argue is for exactly the reverse, that we should try to make the rest of school, in fact, the rest of life, more like kindergarten. So in fact, my group at MIT, we call it the Lifelong Kindergarten Group, because that's where our goal is to try to take that spirit of kindergarten and bring it to learners of all ages. When we talk about this kindergarten approach, we sometimes describe it by 4 guiding principles that in English at least all start with the letter P: projects, passion, peers, and play. So I think kindergarten, the traditional kindergarten, works so well because children are working on projects like building a fantasy town out of wooden blocks. They work on projects that are connected to their passions, things they care about. So children, will make a fantasy city based on their own imagination and their interests. They do it in collaboration with others, with their peers, because they learn with and from peers as they work on these projects, and they do it in a playful spirit, constantly experimenting and trying new things in a playful way. So as we try to bring the kindergarten approach to learners of all ages, we always are thinking about these 4 Ps. how can we enable children to work on projects based on their passions, in collaboration with peers, in a playful spirit. Now, those were the guiding principles we used as we started to develop the Scratch programming language and online community. We launched it 10 years ago, and it's been exciting for us to see how it's grown and how educators like you are making such creative use of it around the world. When we started working on Scratch, we got a lot of our ideas by our work with children. We weren't just sitting in the university making up these ideas. We had started a network of after-school centers for children in low-income communities. We called them computer clubhouses. It was a place where children could come to work on creative projects with new technologies and to learn to think creatively with new technologies. And with the help of the Intel Foundation, these clubhouses spread around the world, including there's one here in Brazil that the Bradesco Foundation helps support. But all over the world we have these clubhouses, and we visited the clubhouses. One thing we saw was that children wanted to create their own interactive stories and games and animations. So we really want to follow the interests of the children, as some of the teachers were mentioning earlier today, how important it is to let children build on their own interests. We saw they wanted to make their own games and stories and animations, and we knew that if we gave them a programming language for doing it, it would also be a great learning experience. So it's a great combination of connecting to children's interests, but also giving them access to new ideas and new ways of thinking. And that was what was behind as we started to work on Scratch, to allow children to snap blocks together, to build up programs for their different characters. And right from the beginning, we also added the online community. So after you create your game or story or animation, you can click the share button and share your project with others around the world. And to us, that was so important because we know that learning is a social process. And the same way that children in kindergarten learn with and from one another, we wanted everyone to be able to do that with Scratch. So we made the online community so that children could get inspiration by what other children create and could also get an audience for their own creations so that other people could try what they create and give them feedback and advice and suggestions. So it's been exciting for us to see in this online community the wide variety of different projects that children create. Everything from animated stories to interactive birthday cards to anime comic strips to virtual construction kits to recreations of classic video games to dress-up doll games to tutorials to interactive artwork to science simulations to games dealing with the Zika virus and trash and the others that you saw today. And for us, the variety of projects is what makes us most excited. Because since we want to connect to children's interests, we know that children have many different interests. So we see the variety of projects on Scratch website as an indication of the success of Scratch. To us, that's more important than the number of projects, is the variety. And similarly, when we run a workshop, the variety of projects is what we look for. If all the children are doing the same thing, we think it's not such a good learning experience. Because we want all children to develop their own voice, their own way of expressing themselves. We really see Scratch coding very similar to learning to write. We want children to learn to write, not just to get a job, although it will help you get a job, but learning to write gives you a way to express your ideas and develop your ideas. The great literacy movements around the world we've been inspired by, like the work of Paulo Freire here in Brazil. The work on having children learn to read and write was not just so they could get jobs, but so they could feel as full members of society. They could be full contributors and develop their own voice, their own way of expressing themselves. And we see coding with Scratch the same way. It's not just about learning a set of technical skills. The The same way that writing is not just about learning punctuation and grammar and spelling. It's about expressing your ideas, as we saw in many of the projects earlier today. Let me share some other examples of the way that we see schools around the world using Scratch in a very similar spirit to what we saw earlier today. And we're very excited when we see Scratch connected to different disciplines, to different subjects, because we don't want coding just to be a separate area. We want it to be the basis for helping learn many other things, the same way that reading and writing are. It's like, here's an example from India. A student in India where they were studying in science class the layers of the earth. So he made a guided tour of the earth. Maybe we can turn up the volume.
ಇದನ್ನಿದ್ದು ಕಲ್ಲು ವಜ್ರ ಬಂಗಾರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ ಒಲಿಗೆ ಇನ್ನೇನಿದೆಯೋ ಇದೇನೋ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಶಬ್ದ.
So he's speaking in his native language of Kannada, putting himself into the project. And his teacher explained to us that what this child was so excited about was he learned that there are things moving inside the earth. And he was so surprised to learn there were things like water moving inside the earth. So he wanted to make a project to let other people know that there are things moving inside the earth. Or here's a project that was about the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, off of South America. And the student here wanted to do a project somewhat like the game Sim City, where you simulate a city. He was simulating Rapa Nui. He'd learned about the light, the economy, and the history. He found out that fishing was very important there. So to survive in this game, you have to make a fishing rod and go fishing. But if you cut down too many trees, it's not good for the environment, so your score goes down. Again, so it was a way for him to share and communicate what he had learned about Rapa Nui and to help other people learn about it. And one more example is from an elementary school where the teacher at the beginning of the year taught the students how to use Scratch, and then they used it for all of their work. So when they were reading a book, they did their book report in Scratch. So they read the book Charlotte's Web, and that's a book that's set on a farm with lots of animals. So here you can see the book report done in Scratch. And of course, since they were reading a book and writing about the book, they were learning about language, but they're learning many other things. If you notice how as the pig moves backwards, it gets smaller as it moves backwards. And that's because the student learned certain artistic ideas about perspective, that to make something look further away, you make it smaller. The student was also learning mathematical ideas about how to scale. You multiply by a fraction to make it smaller and smaller over time. So though this was part of a language class, the student was also learning about art and math concepts. And we see that happening in the best projects. One reason that we like the project-based approach so much is that it both connects to the child's interests, but also connects to knowledge in many different areas. And it helps the child make a deeper connection to that knowledge. Let me give one more example. I'll show an example from Scratch. So here's a game that was made, and I met the child who was making this game, and the child was very happy with the game. It's a game where I can control the big fish, and I eat the little fish. I'm not very good at this game. There. So the child was very proud of his game, but he was also a little frustrated because he wanted the game to keep score, and he didn't know how to make it keep score. So I worked with him to help him learn how to add a score to his game. And I explained that in Scratch, there's a new idea called a variable. And you can make a new variable, and we call it score placar. Is that the right way of doing it? Leo helped me with this earlier. And notice, it automatically on the screen puts up a little monitor that tells me the score. It starts at 0. And then I showed the boy who was working on this block that says to change the score by 1. And he immediately saw that if he put this in his program where the big fish eats the little fish, then every time the big fish eats the little fish, the score will go up by 1. So now the score is 1 and 2. So he was very happy with this, and he reached out to me with his hand and he said, thank you, thank you, thank you, obrigado, obrigado, obrigado. And of course I was happy that he was so happy, but I also started thinking, how often is it that teachers are thanked by their students for teaching them variables? And that usually doesn't happen because usually variables are introduced in a way that's not very connected to students' interests. Students don't see the real reason for having variables. But for this boy, he immediately saw why variables were important. He could make use of variables. And that's what we want to keep doing over and over. So we've tried to, let me stop this, oops. Let me stop the game. So I was excited. During my visit here, I got to visit a school and got to see Scratch at work. I visited school Amarim Lima, is that the name? On Saturday where they had a festival, and it was great to see children work on Scratch projects, somewhat like the ones we saw earlier today. I saw children working on projects about a simulation of the water cycle, how water gets evaporated from the ocean to form clouds and comes over and then rains. So they were making games and simulations based on things they were learning in school. And similar to what we saw earlier, there were also some projects off of the computer. I saw them do human Scratch, where they had the Scratch commands, and they were giving me commands, telling me to go forward and to turn. I had to follow the commands, and they were following the commands. So they had very creative ways of helping people start to learn the systematic thinking that is needed as you start to program. But again, we could see that they were not just learning to think systematically, but also to think creatively, to come up with their own ideas, and to work collaboratively, which we really see is at the core of what Scratch is about. Let me tell you the story of one other member of the Scratch community. This is a young girl in California who was using Scratch outside of school. But I want to give it as an example to show the type of progression and learning over time that can happen as children spend more time with Scratch. This was a girl that one of the things that she really loved best was she loved to draw. She said that she would come home after school and sketch and make drawings every day. And then one day, her friend told her about Scratch and said, with Scratch, you can make your drawings come alive, make your drawings come to life. So this was one of her first projects. I really like this because she just took one of her drawings and added a little bit of animation. Notice how the ears are moving a little bit and the eyes a little bit. And I think that's how we learn many things. We start with something we're already comfortable with, that we're familiar with, and then we reach out and we try something new. And I think this is a great strategy for learning that we can all use in our classrooms. Start with what children already know, then introduce a little bit of something new. It's more comfortable to try something new when you're adding it to something that you care about, the way that Ipsy cared about her drawings. Over time, she really enjoyed this, so she made more and more sophisticated projects. Here's a game that she made that was called Lemonade Time. And it was a game where you control the movement of the animal there, an otter. And the otter has to make lemonade, and it needs to gather the different ingredients like lemon and sugar and water. And it needs to find those or to get money to pay for them. So it was a nice game that she made. But for me, what was most interesting was not just the game itself, but the way it led her to start interacting with other children in the community. So when she put this game online in the Scratch community, you can see that more than 19,000 other people played with her game. Almost 2,000 people said that they loved her game. 88 people remixed her game. We heard about remixing earlier, where children can take a project and make changes to it. So other children liked her project so much, they used it as a starting point, and they made changes to the pictures or to the scripts. In fact, on the Scratch website, about 30% of all of the projects are remixes, where children build on each other's work. So we see a great collaboration happening on the website. And then we also see lots of comments, almost 2,000 comments from other people in the community. And IPSI was paying attention to these comments. You can see in her instructions, it says, due to popular demand, the otter walks a little faster now. So again, she's learning to be a good designer. When you're a designer, you pay attention to the users of what you create. So the user said they'd like the otter to walk faster, so she changed her program. So she was really working together with the community. Some of the comments asked about her artwork, and they said, we'd love to be able to use your artwork. Can you help share more of your artwork with us? So IPSI started putting up projects like this one, where it was a studio that just contained her artwork. And then she said, you must credit me if you use any of these sprites, these characters, but you can edit them as much as you want. And I like this because we could see that she was becoming a good member of the community. When you're a member of the community, you share things and you allow other people to use them. In fact, that's part of a requirement in the Scratch community. We want everyone to learn that we all benefit by sharing with one another and building on each other's work. But we also say that you should get credit. So she's asked for credit. So in the Scratch community, we tell people it's important to share, but people should also give credit to the people that they build upon. Just like in the scientific community, where someone writes a paper and then someone else acknowledges that paper when they build on top of it. IPSI also started doing tutorials. In the Lemonade Time game, you might remember how the background was scrolling, moving in the background. And it's not so easy to make the background scroll in Scratch, but IPSI figured it out, so she then shared how to do it with other people with a tutorial. And again, this surprised us about Scratch and the Scratch community. Because when we developed Scratch, we figured that we would put out some tutorials, and we thought that teachers like you would create some tutorials, but we never realized that children would create so many tutorials. And in fact, if you look on the Scratch website, there are thousands and thousands of tutorials made by children sharing their knowledge with other children. And that's one of the things, again, that makes us very excited. So again, if we look back at what IPSI was doing, we can see that IPSI really was building on those 4 Ps. She was working on projects based on her passions in collaboration with others, sharing with the community in a playful spirit. In some ways, this seems obvious to us, but I would point out there's a lot of interest in learning to code these days, but a lot of websites where you learn to code are not based on these 4 principles, because they just have you solve a problem, move on to the next problem. You don't get to learn about the creative process by working on a project. You don't get to work on things, connect with your interest, where you can make deeper connections with the ideas. So for us, what's important about Scratch is not just that you learn to code. You can do that in many places. But for us, what's important is following these 4 Ps so that children can develop their own voice and learn to think creatively and work collaboratively. Because those will be skills that are important for everybody. It's not just about those who might grow up to get jobs as programmers. That might be true for some, but everybody needs to learn how to think creatively and work collaboratively. Let me say a few things about some of the new directions for Scratch. We heard in some of the presentations this morning about connecting Scratch to the physical world. So there are already some ways of doing that. Like this is another video that shows some examples of using a board we created that has a light sensor. And then this is from a class in Hong Kong where they made a board that acts as a saw for cutting down a tree. And the board has a hole in it, so the light sensor can detect when the hole goes above and it sends that signal to Scratch, which then makes the characters move back and forth. So you can control the characters as you move in the physical world, although they shouldn't cut down so many trees, because we don't want to cut down many trees. So we're trying to do more of this. As we do the next generation of Scratch, we want to make it even easier to connect to the physical world. We want to make it easy for everybody to connect physical sensors and motors and lights to Scratch. Let me show one example. Hopefully we'll get this working. So this is a prototype that we're developing, that we're calling the Scratch bit. And it's not working right away. I'm going to try it again to see if we can get it working. Yes. But what children can do is they can take this and build around it. So some children made, like if they make a game about a bicycle, they could then build bicycle handlebars like this. And this has a tilt sensor in it, so it can detect as you're moving it one way or the other. So let me try to play this game. So, oops, that's the wrong way. There, I was holding it backwards. So if I go this way, I can steer it to get the balloons or the tacos. And I can hit the button to make the horn sound. So again, children are playing more and more games like this, where they have some device and the interface wirelessly connected to the computer. But we don't want children just playing these games. We want them constructing, making their own interfaces, making their own games. So you can see what happens is you get your own set of new blocks, like when the button is pressed, or a block that says when it's tilted in a certain direction. So if I can say if it's tilted upwards, it should make something happen. So what we want to do is to make it easy for anybody that has a physical device to make their new Scratch blocks to control the device and connect it to Scratch. So that'll be part of the next generation of Scratch coming out next year. I'll show one more example from this next generation. And this is, in addition to connect to the physical world, we want to connect to the online world. We know there are so many services today that are available online. So you might know there's one service called Spotify, where you can get music from online. But rather than just getting music and listening, we'd like to give children the power to get any song they want and bring it into their Scratch project. So here, I'll show you, here's a Scratch project. Let me start it. If I start this project, it says, what is your favorite song or musician? So like if I type in Madonna, it will then go to Spotify. And notice how the characters are dancing in rhythm. Because we give new commands like every beat. It's like this says every beat, go to the next costume. So each of those characters is going through its animation in synchronization with the music that was downloaded. So again, we want to give those type of capabilities to children as they make new projects to be able to take advantage of connecting to the physical world, connect to the online world. We want to make sure that we're building on what children are doing in their lives. We should let them become creators and experimenters, not just users of the technology. Now, of course, it's not just about the technology that we're using. We also need to support the technology and support activities in different ways. So in our group, we're spending a lot of time developing sample projects and tutorials. So we now have a page on the Scratch website that has a whole collection of activities to try. So this is the page. In fact, just in the past week, we launched this in Portuguese. So if you now go to the Scratch website, there's about a dozen starter projects. And for each of the projects, there's a tutorial with a tutorial for animating your name or playing music or making a flying animation. And then with each of the tutorials, there's also an educator guide in Portuguese that you could download that gives you an idea of how to introduce this into the classroom. And then we have activity cards. It's like for each of these activities, there's about 10 different cards. On the front of the card, it says, if you want this to happen, like change color when you click on something, and then on the back of the card, it shows you the Scratch blocks for how to do it. So again, all of these cards and materials are now available on the Scratch website, in Portuguese. So I hope you'll go and try them. We know also that at some places it's not very easy to connect online, that the connectivity is not so great, so that people are using the offline downloaded version of Scratch. And we also just updated it, so if you now download the version of Scratch, it will come with all of these materials. If you download it, and your browser is set to Brazilian Portuguese, you'll get the downloaded version of Scratch with the support materials in Brazilian Portuguese. So I hope you'll give that a try and make use of it. There's also, just to make sure you're aware of the resources, my former student, Karen Brennan, is now a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she runs a website called Scratch Ed, Scratch for Educators. And it's a place where educators share their ideas about how to use Scratch. It's like the presentations we heard this morning. It would be great if those types of presentations could be shared with educators elsewhere on Scratch Ed. So I'd encourage you to go to Scratch Ed. You can find ideas there for lesson plans and ways of assessing Scratch in the classroom and connecting to the curriculum. And it would be great if you could share your ideas on Scratch Ed as well. I also want to say one thing about how we set up spaces for Scratch. It's not enough just to have the technology and the activities, but the right type of space. Let me tell a story about our computer clubhouses. I mentioned the centers where children, the computer labs or maker spaces where children come to work on creative projects. And a few years ago, the government of Jordan in the Middle East contacted me because they said that they had a set of spaces across the country called knowledge stations that they set up as community centers with technology, but people weren't going there. But people were going to the computer clubhouse, and they wanted me to come and help figure out why. And it was pretty obvious just looking at the space. So this was one of the knowledge stations. And one thing you'll see is it's set up with everything facing forward, just sitting at the computer, looking ahead. You notice there's nothing on the wall to spark ideas. In the same city, this is in Amman, Jordan, here's the computer clubhouse. The wall's full of examples to spark ideas. The computers put in clusters so that people can go around and see what others are working on and sharing ideas with one another. It's easy for people to work together in groups and collaborate. There are places for people to, there's a green table without any computers where people can build things and get together and sketch out plans. So rethinking the spaces is also something that we think is very important. And again, as we were designing these computer clubhouses, we were again influenced by kindergarten. These look more like the activity areas that you see in a kindergarten. And we think maker spaces and computer labs, again, should be set up more like kindergartens. Let me end with one final story that I heard from a friend of mine who had a daughter in kindergarten. Her daughter's name was Lily. And Lily came home from kindergarten one day, and she said this to her mother. She said, Daisy, her friend, did kindergarten last year and is doing it again this year for 2 whole years. I want to do kindergarten again too. And again, as I heard this story, it made me realize that Lily really probably had some good intuitions. She probably knew that after kindergarten, she would never again have the same opportunities for creative expression and creative thinking. And I think that's really sad. But we don't want to have people just stay in kindergarten forever. We need to change the rest of school so that young girls like Lily and Daisy, as they move on from kindergarten, can continue to learn in that kindergarten spirit. So that's what our group is dedicated to, but it's a big project. We know that there are many changes that are needed to bring that type of kindergarten spirit to learners of all ages. We developed Scratch and the materials and the website and the community to help make that happen, but there's so much else that needs to happen. It's exciting for me to come and visit in Brazil to the Scratch conference and to meet with you, because I start to see how you are helping to make classrooms into kindergartens in the way that you're using Scratch. But I know it's a big challenge to do that, so we really need people around the world to all work together. But I think if we all work together, we'll be able to start to bring about the changes that are needed so that children growing up today can continue to learn in a kindergarten spirit and can be prepared to develop as creative thinkers so they'll be ready for tomorrow's society where creative thinking will be more important than ever before. Thank you very much.